And just poking above the tree line up there, we can see one of the spires of the majestic St Paul's Cathedral. How are you all? How are you all doing? It's a sultry Wednesday afternoon, and I thought I would pick up my trail around the churches of the City of London, a magnificent walk into many of the different ages of this brilliant, wonderful city. I'm doing a slightly stationary opening piece of camera because I've come out of St Paul's Underground station and I'm confronted with two of my churches straight away. So I've worked out what I think is a really interesting kind of circuit, and it starts right over behind me here, just off Cheapside in Foster Lane. And once again I have my trusty John Betjeman's Guide to the City of London Churches to keep us informed along the way. The original church here was built in the 14th century, and I believe some of the medieval church does remain. I reckon that bit down the back there is part of the old medieval church. Although it was badly damaged during the Great Fire of London, it wasn't completely destroyed, but for some reason they pulled down the old tower at the end of the 17th century. It was rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren, so I'm not entirely sure what was going on there. And then it was badly damaged during the Blitz and had to be quite extensively renovated. The notable feature of St Vedast is its organ, which was built in the 1730s, but for a completely different church, St Bartholomew without-Exchange, and then was moved here. This is the courtyard here, which is really delightful. This is a really lucky accident. The door here was open. I knew I'd seen this somewhere, and I couldn't think where it was, and it isn't in any of my notes. And look, it's a part of Roman pavement, found 18 foot below the floor of the Church of St Matthew, Friday Street, demolished in 1886. Look, isn't it a real piece of magic coming back to us from the deep past? And look at this lovely little courtyard here, in the shade of that tree. Oh, a really magical little spot. With these kind of porticos here, these columns, it's got a kind of Roman feel to it, hasn't it? And basically just over the road from St Vedast, we have the site of St Leonard's Church, destroyed by the Great Fire of 1666. Now what do we have here? Priest's Court. It's great. I love these little alleyways in the City of London. I think we're obliged to go down here, aren't we? Even though it's not on my route. Anywhere of interest can be on the route today. Just comes out to a little courtyard here behind the church. Oh, look. And another little alleyway, Rose and Crown Court. So these little alleyways and passageways, like the two just here in Foster Lane, this area here north of St Paul's was one of the first sort of areas to be rebuilt after the Great Fire of 1666. People had been pushed west and been pushed east. So this was one of the first bits to be rebuilt and one of the first sort of bits to be resettled after that devastating fire of 1666, which of course was one of the major factors that shaped the City of London churches. You had these major events. You had a lot of churches that were built in the Middle Ages, and you had the Great Fire of London, and you had a reorganisation of the parishes in the 19th century, and then you had the Blitz that left us with a fraction of the original, I think it was 109 churches. What we have are some completely intact churches, some of which are still the medieval churches, and we'll hopefully see at least one of those quite soon actually. But others, we have the sites of them, like the one back there, St Leonard's, and a few others we have just towers or fragments, or sometimes just the churchyards. I'm not going to attempt to cover as many of the churches as I did last time, but I think it's going to be about quality rather than quantity today. And I don't know how many videos it's going to take us to cover all the 39 remaining churches. Say at least 3, if not 4. And then obviously we want to include as many of the kind of lost churches of the City of London as well. So this series could be a bit like the London Loop. You just keep going around and around and around. And obviously we're not going to ignore the other things that we pass along the way. Something intriguing just over the road, just as I'm saying that. So let's go and see what it is. So this is the site of St John Zachary, destroyed by the Great Fire of London in 1666.
St John Zachary was a medieval church which was recorded as early as the 12th century and may have been much older. The Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths had bought land in the area in 1339 and built the earliest recorded livery hall.
So I guess this must be something connected to the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths. Is that a panther or a leopard or something? And there's something really magic about the fact that there's this garden here where once there was a medieval church. The city is haunted by ghosts of its past. We have these ghosts of the medieval churches destroyed by the Great Fire. Going back before that, we have the ghosts of Roman London, the Great Londinium. And there are fragments of the wall that remain around the edge of the city. And I did a walk around that at the beginning of this year or the end of last year. I'll put a link below. Of course, that city was abandoned when the Romans left and fell into disrepair. So all around us there are a lot of layers of the past all built up on top of each other. And I just feel like those pasts still reverberate through the pavement, and they live on in places like this that has its own stories now as a garden where people sit at lunchtime and where birds come and there's wildlife here. It's why walking in the city is always so rewarding. Here we have the church of St Anne and St Agnes. This is another medieval church that was badly damaged during the Great Fire of London and restored by Sir Christopher Wren in the 1670s. And the little garden here is laid out over the churchyard. So there must be hundreds of bodies buried beneath the ground here. Sobering thought whilst you're munching on your sandwich. I mean, actually the most intriguing thing here is this curious metal box, LEA, London Electricity. Is that London? Someone watching this video will know exactly what that box is. I think it's something to do with electricity, but I imagine it's not fulfilling that function anymore, right? So I'm just going to turn now into St Martin's le Grand. But I'm drawn to a couple of blue plaques on the other side of the road here, which could be indicators of lost churches. Maybe today is turning into as much of a lost churches walk as a churches walk. So the first of the plaques on this large building here. So it's the site of the Bullenmouth Inn, demolished in 1888. It must have been an inn of some vintage to get a blue plaque here. Also the site of Northumberland House. I don't know what Northumberland House was, we'll have to look it up. I think there was more than one Northumberland House, wasn't there, in London? There was one at the end of Northumberland Avenue, wasn't there, on Trafalgar Square, which was a very grand house. This was obviously a different one. And here we go. This is what we're really interested in. It was also the site of the French Protestant Church, demolished in 1888. I wonder if all these buildings were demolished to make way for this great big thing here. It looks as though it's kind of constructed out of Portland stone. And look at this little beautiful relic posing as a police public phone box. We have a mini TARDIS here. For, well, you know, bearing in mind that the TARDIS can warp space and time, who knows how big it is inside. Isn't it fantastic they've left it here? So here we have St Botolph Aldersgate, which Priestley's quite dismissive of this. It was rebuilt in 1788. I don't know when the original church was built. I think this is quite grand. I think they may have maybe beautified the front of it, facing the street perhaps, since Priestley was writing, but it's quite a magnificent church. It's got some interesting features associated with it that we're going to have a look at. And the plaque here on the outside of the church tells us that a church building has stood here for nearly 1,000 years, which is quite incredible, isn't it? And you can see it's a very important site for both Methodists and Postmans. It tells us here that the conversion of the Reverend John Wesley took place in a meeting room that was probably around this site, 28 Aldersgate Street, on the 24th of May 1738, and also something to do with Reverend Charles Wesley. It says, I suppose it was his conversion, sorry, also in 1738. You could say it's the birthplace of Methodism. And also this little churchyard beside it is the Postmans Park. A Christian open-air meeting is held here every Monday at 1:15 from May to September. This is a really magical space. It's actually one of the largest open spaces in the City of London. And this loggia here is actually a memorial. It's to commemorate heroic self-sacrifice. And it was instituted in 1899 to kind of memorialise people who lost their lives saving others and who would otherwise be forgotten. What a really beautiful sentiment. It was conceived and undertaken by artist George Frederick Watts, member of the Royal Academy. And these beautiful ceramic tiles here bear the memorials. Thomas Griffin here, fitter's labourer who died in 1899 in a boiler explosion at Battersea Sugar Refinery. Joseph Andrew Ford, aged 30, who died a member of the fire brigade, saving people from a fire in Gray's Inn Road. Amelia Kennedy, aged 19, died trying to save her sister from their burning house in Edwards Lane, Stoke Newington, 1871. Mary Rogers, stewardess of the Stella, who died in 1899, self-sacrificed by giving up her life belt and voluntarily going down with the sinking ship. Wow. And we have some recent ones here. Lee Pitt, reprographic operator, aged 30, saved a drowning boy from the canal at Thamesmead, but sadly was unable to save himself. 7th of June 2007. So this park is built on the amalgamation of 3 burial grounds. At one point at the end of the 19th century, the burial situation was so bad they would just lay the bodies out on the ground and covered them with soil. So hence the ground level here got much higher than the street below. One of the churchyards that was incorporated into this park dated back to the 13th century. So there are some very old bones beneath this ground here. just a couple more special locations to go. And here, taking me rather by surprise, is the brand new St Bart's Hospital. St Bart's is integral to our next significant location. So, this is Little Britain. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm in a slight state of shock. This has changed significantly since I was last along here. I used to walk through here a lot of evenings of the week. I won't say most evenings of the week, but certainly 2 or 3. I guess medieval hospitals have to be rebuilt at some point, but... Wow, this is Bartholomew Close. They've really opened this out, haven't they? I'm struggling to remember what it was like here, adjacent to Little Britain. So here in Bartholomew Close, we're just outside the old Roman wall. That's just a little bit further to the east. So this area all around here, and when we get up to Smithfield, would have been marshy land just outside the Roman wall. That northwest corner of the city, of the old Roman city there, that's believed to be the oldest inhabited part of the old city. Of course, here at the bottom of the slopes that would have led up to the fields of Islington and then the Northern Heights, which was a thick forested area. Here in Bartholomew Close, this is where Hogarth was born. Here we have Butcher's Hall, which is one of the old guilds of London. You can see the grand chandeliers up there on the second floor. It's incredible to see all this new building of St Bart's Hospital, because when I lived in Hackney South and Shoreditch in the early 90s, in 1992, the Conservative government tried to close Bart's Hospital. And there was a really big campaign to save it, and now look at it. Old entrance to Bart's. Here it is, Smithfield, the smooth field. You have the meat market over there, which sits on the site of the old cattle market, which moved north to Islington in the middle of the 19th century. And all sorts of things went on Smithfield, on the smooth field. Here we have the memorial to William Wallace, who was executed here in 1296, remembered by the Scottish people as a great hero, remembered less fondly by the people of the north of England, where he murdered and slaughtered and burnt his way down through the country. What does it say here about William Wallace? It said that he fought dauntlessly in defence of his country's liberty and independence in the face of fearful odds and great hardship, being eventually betrayed and captured and brought to London and put to death on this spot in 1305. Apparently, when they brought Wallace here to be executed, he was hung for a few minutes and then taken down and allowed to revive and come back to consciousness before they tore out his guts, cut off his arms and his legs and his head, and his arms and legs were sent to the 4 corners of the country, and his head was placed on a spike on London Bridge. This was also the spot of execution of a fella called John Rogers, Protestant martyr, who was burnt at the stake here by Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, who apparently watched the executions from the gatehouse above St Bartholomew the Great that leads in to St Bartholomew the Great, and she would dine on roast chicken and red wine and watch the Protestants burn out here where I'm stood now, where my namesake was burnt at the stake, not far from where I'm stood right now. Kind of chilling, isn't it? Maybe we'll finish with his church, which is just behind me on the other side on Holborn Viaduct. But let's go and have a look at Bartholomew the Great. This area here was used by the Romans as a dumping ground for their rubbish, and also where they would bury their dead. It's also the site of the notorious Bartholomew Fair, which was a great spectacle. Took place in August, around the 24th of August, and all sorts of things would go out here on the smooth field. The Priory Church of Bartholomew the Great, St Bartholomew the Great, 1123 AD. And that is where we're going next. The story goes, a fellow called Rahere, I think that's how you pronounce it, he was a jester to Henry I. And apparently he caught malaria on a visit to Rome. And he said that if he survived the malaria, he would get the king to build a church. And in his malarial kind of days, he saw a vision that the church would be built on the smooth field here at Smithfield. And this is the priory that was built on this land here. I think the original church is inside the grounds of St Bart's Hospital, and this church was built around the same time in the 12th century. It's a place of vision, a place of prophecy, and it also claims to be the oldest parish church in London. And here it is, the Priory Church of St Bartholomew the Great, built in 1123. It's been used in a few films, most notably I think Shakespeare in Love. There was a key scene that was shot here. I always love this area around Smithfield. You get a real sense for the old street plan of London, a lot like those laneways and alleyways around the city. And I think up here we have one of the places where John Betjeman lived, where Sir John Betjeman resided, possibly, who knows, where he even wrote this guidebook. Rising Sun Court there. The Rising Sun's a decent pub. That used to be one of my regular haunts on my walks home from work once upon a time. So from memory, the John Betjeman plaque is in Cloth Court. And I can see a blue plaque there, so it sounds like my memory has served me right, perhaps, on this occasion. 43 Cloth Court. And there we have the plaque to Sir John Betjeman, poet laureate who lived here. Doesn't give the dates he lived here, but in my mind he lived here when he wrote this guidebook to the city churches. Really, the best time to walk around here is at night. That's when the spirits of the past really walk abroad with you and you're not walking alone. So I feel like we should end this circuit of City of London churches by going to visit the church of my namesake, John Rogers, which is just around the corner. Quite why this monument to the Great Fire of London is here on the corner of, what are we on, Giltspur Street and Cock Lane. I'm not entirely sure, but the little boy here is supposed to symbolise the sin of gluttony to which the Great Fire was ascribed, when not ascribed to papists, as on the monument it says here. And the golden boy, I suppose, is here to remind us of the Great Fire. It started in Pye Corner, which is a little way away from here, isn't it? But it's found its way into this building here. I'm not entirely sure why, on the corner of a wonderful Cock Lane which runs down into the River Fleet. It was originally built into the front of a public house called the Fortune of War, which used to occupy this site and was pulled down in 1910. Now this is the really interesting thing. The Fortune of War was the chief house of call north of the river for resurrectionists in body snatching days. Years ago, the landlord used to show the room where on benches round the walls the bodies were placed, labelled with the snatchers' names, waiting till the surgeons at St Bartholomew's could run round and appraise them. So fittingly, our final church of this tour of the City of London churches is the largest church in the City of London and could lay claim to being one of the oldest. It says here that it was built on the site of a Saxon church dedicated to St Edmund. The church became known as St Edmund and the Holy Sepulchre during the years of 1103 to 1173, when it was in the care of the Augustinian canons, who were Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. It's quite an astonishing bit of history there, isn't it? But later it became abbreviated to St Sepulchre, and now we call it St Sepulchre-without-Newgate. You see, I'm struggling with Sepulchre, aren't you? It was rebuilt in 1450 and enlarged, and it was quite damaged during the Great Fire, and then the interior was restored in 1670. And here, of course, this is why I always remember this church. Among the famous names associated with the church are John Rogers, vicar, first Protestant martyr. Poor old John Rogers. I think he was burnt in 1555, I think. I've probably already put the date on the screen, haven't I? Over there at Smithfield. Over the road there we have the Old Bailey and the site of Newgate Prison, just over the road. So the church has always been associated with that location and what goes on both there and around the corner at Smithfield, a famous place of execution. So the bells would toll out here at St Sepulchre at 8 in the morning, announcing the time of execution. You can imagine what the sound of those bells would have meant for the people over the road in Newgate, waiting to be taken out to the gallows just over the road there. It's part of its dark history. And of course, you could say, if you wanted to be cruel, that it was ironic that the vicar of St Sepulchre himself ended up being executed around the corner at Smithfield. Old John Rogers was given quite a few chances to recant his beliefs, including his children, who implored him to renounce his Protestant faith, but he was quite a zealous chap. He'd been involved in the translation of the Bible into English, which itself was a mortal sin at the time, and he was having none of it. He was paraded. He was actually captured in Epping Forest and then taken down through Stratford, which is always like I live on the route that John Rogers was taken to his place of execution. Well, thank you so much for joining me on part 2 of my walking tour of the churches of the City of London. And yet again, it's been a real revelation, a real opening up of the layers of history of our great city. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And it looks like there's going to be at least a part 3, if not a part 4. And why not? And then we can do more of the features of the City of London. Maybe some of the secret gardens, which somebody suggested to me recently. So, as I ever like to say, thank you so much for coming with me. Thank you to my wonderful supporters on Patreon. And take care of yourselves. Have a great week. And as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. But wherever it is, it will be somewhere magnificent.